My name is Abe Storer. I'm a painter and writer living in Wellfleet, Massachusetts. Today, I'll be reading my story, Getting It Up, from issue 2 of the newly revived Cape Cod Compass. Recording from Provincetown Television. Thank you, Nate. The parking lot at White Crest Beach in Wellfleet is known for its sweeping views of the Atlantic Ocean. But on a July evening this summer, a group of onlookers stood looking downward, not outward. At the base of the dune, a massive tree, about 60 feet long, laid on the beach, its trunk propped up on a mound of sand, circling a 10-foot deep hole. A group of mostly young, shirtless men stood around with shovels, putting the finishing touches on the digging job, with spools of fluorescent green rope, a pile of firewood, beer cans, and wooden shipping pallets strewn about it. Looked like a cross between a construction site, an art installation, and an adult-sized playground. From above, the whole thing was confounding, if not intriguing. What was the purpose of all this effort? Below, a young man holding a shovel explained to me that they were erecting a kahuna pole. He said the tradition of raising a washed-up tree trunk has Hawaiian origins. Makes the wave gods happy, says Colin Nobili, the ringleader of the effort, a Wellfleet lifeguard with a chipped front tooth, floppy mohawk, and clear, intense eyes. Eric Anderson, another organizer, described it as an appeal to Neptune, the god of water. Historically, poles have been used by various cultures for ritualistic purposes. I couldn't find much to verify the Hawaiian origins of kahuna poles, but there are plenty of other similar traditions. The Old Testament references Asherah poles, a sacred tree or pole associated with the ancient Canaanite goddess Asherah. Indigenous peoples in the northwestern United States and western Canada carved large trees into totem poles to represent mythological events or honor ancestors. Anderson says poles were used in the 1800s as navigation markers for dory fishermen. The maypole, an object with European pagan roots, is associated with the beginning of summer. Here in America, we have the Washington Monument and, closer to home, the Pilgrim Monument. Both, essentially, poles rising into the sky. Anderson estimates that Wellfleet surfers have been erecting kahuna poles since the mid-70s. Often, Wellfleet lifeguards were the organizers of these rituals amongst the early generation of surfers, Anderson says. He remembers a summer day in the mid-90s when his father, Lee Anderson, a Wellfleet lifeguard, paddled out to tie up a large tree floating by the beach. A group of lifeguards and surfers reeled it in. It was probably 120 feet long, 6 inches or less at the top, and no more than a foot at the bottom, says Anderson. For kahuna poles, longer has always been better. The 1990s were a golden age for kahuna poles on Cape Cod. News would spread by word of mouth, and people would come from miles away to put up a kahuna pole, says Anderson. There were often 3 men in charge: the brain, the brawn, and the person that could get people to show up, says Anderson. His father, who like Anderson did tree work, was the brains, supplying the rope. Bill Lloyd, affectionately remembered by many surfers as Uncle Bill, was a head lifeguard, beach administrator, and the kind of guy that could get people to really do anything, says Anderson. We probably put up 6 or 7 poles in his reign, says Anderson. For a while, it seemed that the tradition was dying out. Then came Nobili. Nobili grew up in Eastham, in a family known for their ingenuity and endurance. His father, a found object sculptor, often hauls up beach debris for his large-scale sculptures. His mother is an accomplished runner and demanding track coach at Nauset High School. Nobili remembers hearing about a kahuna pole in 2008 that was so tall it could be seen from Ocean View Drive. He was only 8 at the time and not involved. This year, however, there were a handful of kids in the mix, including Anderson's 2 young children. The pole this year might be the largest since that one. It's a tree too tall for these parts. I imagine it might have floated down a river in Maine and into the open ocean. Nobili spotted it over the winter at Ballston Beach in Truro. about 7 miles from Whitecrest. 3 days before its raising, he and about 15 others brought it by water up the coast. There were 13 of us in the water and a few on the beach with support backpacks in case anyone got hypothermia, says Nobili. They packed chicken soup and blankets. The swimmers wore wetsuits and stayed safe aside from a few jabs to their ribs from branch stumps. The journey took 5.5 hours of pushing the tree through surf as the ocean shifted from low to high tide. They arrived at Whitecrest by moonlight, finishing the task just before midnight. 2 days later, they attempted to raise it on the evening of a full moon, but they didn't have enough light to get it up. On this evening, however, the sun was slowly edging below the dune, casting a long shadow on the beach. A group of onlookers, silhouetted against the light, stood in a line on the top of the dune, waiting. Nobili bolted down the face of the dune. He took hold of a rope attached to the top of the tree and stood on the crest of the mound surrounding the pole. He looked up toward the top of the dune, where Anderson was waiting to pull the tree upward with his truck. Like his father, Anderson was involved in engineering the project and supplying the rope. Nobili, as chief organizer, had taken up Uncle Bill's mantle. Someone ran the rope up the dune, threw a winch, and attached it to Anderson's truck. Once the rope was secured, Nobili emerged with a white helmet. A hush fell over the group as they assembled to raise the pole. The shovels were planted in the sand, spines straightened, and eyes focused on Nobili, who stood with arms raised, gesturing to the people directing the truck at the top of the dune. "Remember, if this starts to fall, you run," says Nobili. "We don't want anyone to get hurt." He directed the group to divide into two, with 15 people holding a rope on each side of the pole, one on the north side and one on the south side. As the tree rose, the two groups edged forward from the base of the dune toward the ocean, the whole time keeping the ropes taut. "Keep your eyes on the tip," someone said. People laughed. "North side, stop," shouted Nobili. He directed the effort so the pole would rise straight. The object became animated, resurrected. Finally, it hovered upright, suspended by the tension of the three ropes. The hushed, concentrated energy quickly shifted. At Nobili's direction, a group ran toward the center, furiously shoveling sand at the base of the tree to stabilize it. A group of children ran toward the center to help. A man raised his hand, keeping them back. This was dangerous work. "Send the women and children into the center," someone else shouted. More nervous laughter. As the tree stabilized, Nobili started calling off people from the ropes. "We can use one person from each side," he yelled. "Dillon and Laird," he called. They raced forward and helped shovel. The kids joined in now too, and anyone else around. Those without a shovel heaped armfuls of sand between their legs toward the base of the pole. In the center, the energy was frantic, almost like an ecstatic dance. Once stabilized, someone called anyone under 5 feet, mostly kids, to the center. They stomped around the pole, packing the sand. The vigorous energy gradually subsided, and as the group backed away from the now stabilized pole, a glow of accomplishment and relief settled over them. Eyes looked upward, admiring the forceful vertical line stretching into the sky, a counterpoint to the horizon. There was only one regret. "We forgot to bury a bottle of rum," said Nobili. "I don't think anyone really believed the waves would get any better." "It's a good team-building activity," says Nobili. He describes his role as making the group act as one body, so no one gets crushed. "You have to make people do and not think. Take their individualism away," he says. "Like the military," someone chimes in. "It's seemingly pointless," admitted Nobili, "but we do it for the love of the endeavor, to see if we can do it." Anderson describes the activity as shared misery between people. "I got your back, you got mine." Although this was an inclusive effort, it is largely a young man's game. There's a women's circle that often meets on full moons at a beach down the road. The energy and imagery that night was decidedly more masculine. For anyone that hasn't been paying attention to the recent discourse about men, the latest trends seem grim. Men don't have enough friends, they aren't getting married or even dating. They're more likely than women to die deaths of desperation. They underperform in school, and the industrial jobs in which they once thrived are disappearing. But at least tonight, the boys seemed all right. Maybe their task was pointless, but there was strength, ingenuity, determination, brotherhood, and even a bit of heroism on display. Some foolishness, too, as the sky turned a dark, inky blue, and people started arranging the shipping pallets and logs for a celebratory bonfire. Nobili shimmied up the pole. Nearly 50 feet from the ground, he was silhouetted against the night sky. "Get me a coconut," someone yelled. "Throw him up a beer," said another.